Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you the new Canadian Pediatric Society position statement on healthy screen use in children 0 to 5. And particularly thank you to Will for reaching out to me to allow me to join you for this amazing forum, and what a great opportunity to share all the work that we're doing. Really aligns with some of the things that you've just spoken to us about. So as Will has already introduced, I have been the chair of the Digital Health Task Force for the Canadian Pediatric Society that developed the position statement. But I'm also lucky enough to work just around the corner from this venue at CPRI, a Child and Parent Resource Institute. I don't know if many of you know what CPRI is, but it is a primarily children's mental health facility. And I'm one of the pediatricians that works there, and I do both inpatient and outpatient assessments, primarily focusing on children with complex neurodevelopmental disorders. I have no disclosures, personal disclosures. However, TELUS and TELUS Wise did provide the CPS with an unrestricted educational grant, and that helped fund a medical researcher that did a literature search for us, a medical writer, as well as producing some of the educational materials that I will share with you later today as well. So this is essentially why we're all here today, right? This was the research question. Some of you look at this little guy and cringe, and you think, he's gonna grow up, I think he's gonna grow up to be one of my future patients. He's gonna have attention problems, learning difficulties, sleep problems, obesity, myopia, and the list goes on. Or, on the other hand, and many parents are hoping we're going to say this, could he be enriching his learning environment, learning pro-social behavior, have a great vocabulary, become tech savvy by the time he's 2? Well, this is my adorable niece, Sophie, and she's 2, and as you can see, she's already discovered her older brother's iPad, and she is quite adept at swiping. And the reality is, this is Modern Family, right? This is the kids that we see in our practices every single day. So I'm going to start with just a few definitions and run through some of the current trends that led to the statement development, and then really focus on what are the key recommendations that came out of this work. So what is screen time? So screen time is time spent in front of any screen, and good old-fashioned TV still dominates, but kids are accumulating screen time very quickly through a variety of sources, tablets, video games, computers, and even wearable technology. And digital media refers to any content delivered over the internet on any of those devices. So here are the current trends. In 2014, Active Healthy Kids Canada reported that the average child between 3 and 5 spends an average of 2 hours in front of a screen per day. 2016 Participation Report Card found that only 15% of preschoolers are actually meeting the current Canadian guidelines for sedentary behavior, which actually is recommending less than 1 hour per day. And TV time still dominates, but kids accumulate screen time so quickly from a variety of sources at home, childcare, and then all of these new mobile devices. So it adds up very quickly. Some worldwide trends. So in the US, mobile media use in 2 to 4-year-olds doubled in only 2 years. And another US study is reporting the average child 8 months to 8 years is exposed to nearly 4 hours of background TV a day. And a recent UK study that found over half of infants under a year are using a touch screen daily. So I know that this is impacting all of us. The limit of age is quite shocking. It's ubiquitous, it's prevalent, it's out there. And so the CPS decided to get together a digital health task force to really look into this. And in order to provide you with some background to the current statement, the last statement produced by the Canadian Paediatric Society was actually in 2003. And it was then retired in 2012 because it's no longer reflective of today's modern family. And research has been unable to keep up with this fast-paced evolving technology. So what did we know in 2003? Well, we knew that Canadian children, they watch an excessive amount of TV. Well, that's still true today. We also know that excessive amounts of TV can have a negative impact on health and learning and attention. Still true today. And most importantly for me and you clinicians in the room is that physicians can have an impact on the TV viewing habits of Canadian children. But what we didn't know was that the first generation iPhone would hit the market in 2007. And take a look at all the products available to us today. Everything's adapted to our technology now. And I came across this device. It's called the Swipe and Feed. And it really disturbs me. You know, you can text, you can Google, you can check your emails, all while feeding your baby. But look at where the baby's eyes are. Right? He's just sort of drifting off into space. He's not having that nice social interaction with that caregiver or parent. And it's even called Swipe and Feed. The swipe comes first. So this was very much a group effort. We got together a task force representatives from a wide variety of expertise. Members of the CPS committees on mental health, developmental pediatrics, community peds, adolescent medicine. As well, we had a speech and language pathologist and the director of education, Matthew Johnson, from Media Smarts, which is a nonprofit organization for media literacy. So the task force actually started by doing a survey of the membership to really see what the needs were. What are some of the questions that parents and pediatricians are asking about screen use? Then we went on to develop the research, the literature search and the statement development. So this is what our survey told us, that on a regular basis, pediatricians and parents are seeking information on what is appropriate screen use in young children. And most parents are looking for advice on duration, so how much is too much. The other theme was how to set limits on all of this stuff. Parents are really concerned about the effects on health and well-being, and they're also asking us what are some of the options as far as healthier, optimal content. So the literature search was produced by Dr. Jessie McGowan. And this essentially was the research question. What are the health-related benefits and harms associated with screen use in children under 5? And I'm just going to, again, highlight that this statement is for children 0 to 5, but there are plans to produce follow-up statements for school-age kids as well as adolescents. But we just couldn't fit all of those issues into one position statement. To summarize the literature, essentially most of the studies are on the short-term effects of screen time versus the longer-term effects. Those studies are yet to be produced because, of course, technology is outpacing research at this point. The data is primarily still heavily focused on TV-based data versus some of the newer media platforms. And screen time research in infants and toddlers is very scant. The research is broken into 3 categories, 3 different domains that we looked at. We looked at developmental health effects, so things like language, learning, executive functioning, attention. We looked at the physical health effects, again, sleep, obesity, cardiometabolic diseases, and so on. And then some of the psychosocial effects, such as parent-child interactions, parenting, as well as violent media and its relationship to aggressive behaviors. So, again, just a summary of what we found as the current evidence. Evidence is scant for the under 2s. As you can imagine, we don't have that data, and hopefully the research is going to continue to be scant. Although if we think about the trends that 50% of infants are exposed to touchscreens daily, that research is yet to be produced. However, just because we haven't necessarily found a negative effect doesn't equal benefit, right? And we do know what does benefit early childhood learning and development. Infants, toddlers are social learners, right? They learn through face-to-face interactions with the loving caregiver and parent. They need to go out and explore their world using all of their senses, manipulative toys, outdoor play, creative imaginary play. That's how they learn best. And so the research, again, isn't necessarily showing negative or positive, but we do know what does benefit young infants. So for the older kids, over 2, are there benefits? Think about that little guy on the screen, or my niece Sophie. Are there benefits to introducing this stuff early? Well, some evidence. And again, there's a lot of qualifiers to this. So some learning enhancing benefits for kids over 2, really with high quality educational content. For instance, electronic books. Some of the e-books are great to sort of help pull out some of those early literacy skills, but a parent and caregiver must be present in order to help them transfer what they're seeing on that 2D screen to 3D real-life experiences. Again, quality programming can be beneficial. It can teach kids some positive racial attitudes, anti-violence, empathy, tolerance, and some imaginative play. Again, needing a caregiver or parent or an adult to help them transfer what they're learning on a screen to real-life experiences. And I see in my practice every day the calming nature of a screen for a sort of distressful situation or a painful procedure. Some of you may have noticed in your dentist office there's a screen that's mounted on the ceiling for kids, or pulling out a screen to help with blood work, for instance. And that's a very specific use of a screen to help calm a distressed child. And then some short-term effects on increased physical activity, particularly using some of these mobile apps. However, we are seeing risks for development. So lots of emerging evidence, and if you think back to the literature search, again, a lot of this is still short-term effects that we're able to show. We're showing associations, but we're not necessarily able to prove causality at this point in time. Many of you may have read or heard about a study that was out about 5 years ago, where a group of researchers in the States took 64-year-old kids, and they broke them into 3 groups. The first group got to watch 9 minutes of SpongeBob. And does everybody know what SpongeBob SquarePants? So it's this kind of really fast-paced, nonsensical, fantastical type of cartoon. The next group watched 9 minutes of Caillou, which is a little preschooler boy going through his day, and it's slower paced, more real-life experiences. And the third group was able to draw freely with coloring markers, crayons, and paper, just for 9 minutes, free coloring drawing. Immediately after the groups finished that task, the researchers were a group of psychologists. They ran them through some executive functioning type of tasks. So for instance, they asked the children, if I tell you to touch your head, I actually want you to touch your toes. And when I tell you to touch your toes, I'd like you to touch your head. Or moving a peg in a specific order along a board, or a delayed gratification type of task. And they found a significant negative impact on the executive functioning in the group that watched the SpongeBob or the fast-paced cartoon, whereas the educational TV Caillou or the drawing task didn't show a negative effect at all. So again, it's short-term, small group, but it's quite striking as to what the content these kids are watching and the activities and how that may be impacting on their learning. So some psychosocial risks. We are finding that parents' own use of screen time is displacing healthier interactions. And I think Will brought this up nicely in how we are modeling our own use of screens really impacts on daily life and interactions with, between parents and kids. We talked about some potential benefits of screens with the e-books and the early literacy, but the fact is that children quickly go from educational material to primarily entertainment-based programs. So reading is actually the least common activity that kids choose to use on a tablet or a mobile device. And we do know that exposure to media violence increases the risk of aggressive behaviors. And this research actually spans over many, many decades. This is some of the research that does show the longer term effects. Media violence really especially damaging to young children who are unable to separate fact from fantasy, and they really need an adult present to help them make sense of the world. So physical health risks. Now this is also an area where we actually do see a strong causal link between excessive TV viewing and childhood obesity. It not only reduces the physical activity, but also there's the messages that kids get through their screen use, advertising for junk food or unhealthy messages, and also just the sedentary behavior. We are also seeing emerging evidence for infants who are exposed to touch screens daily, have delayed sleep onset and differences in their sleep schedules. So we are seeing the negative effects. In fact, a 2012 Canadian study out of McMaster showed that 1 hour of TV a day increases your risk of obesity and overweight by 50%. So why are we only focusing on 0 to 5 years? Well, the statement, like I had mentioned earlier, the issues in older children, school-age children, and adolescents couldn't possibly be fit into one statement. So we're starting at the earliest age group in order to really help reduce the risk, because we know that early overexposure can increase your risk of overuse later on. We also know that limit setting is easier if you start early rather than trying to take away that screen later on. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that screen use does tend quickly to change to entertainment-based programming versus exclusively educational. I also just want to highlight that the focus of the position statement is on the neurotypical child, while at the same time we do recognize that technology plays a hugely complementary role in other populations. Kids with mobility issues, kids with communication delays, for example, technology plays a wonderful role. But again, we couldn't tackle all of those issues in one statement. So here we are, the 4 M's of screen time. So based on the current evidence and expert consensus and the internal and external review processes, the task force was able to come up with this really easy to remember and user-friendly model, the 4M model of screen time. And as you can see, the 4 M's are minimize, mitigate, mindful use, and model. And so the first M is for minimize. So in general, we're recommending counseling families of young children to generally minimize any routine or regular screen time in children 0 to 5 years. And more specifically, screen time for children less than 2 years is not recommended. Now, some of you may have heard about the American guidelines that came out about this time last year, and they've softened their approach. They're suggesting that starting screen time as young as 18 months in certain circumstances, particularly with video chatting, is okay. And our task force debated and deliberated over this point, and we came to the conclusion that there's absolutely no evidence in the literature, there's no evidence that children are lacking in their development by not giving them screen time under 2 years, so we left it at the 2-year mark. And in fact, some of the task force members wanted to raise that age as well. But again, we have to be balanced. We have to be realistic what's happening in daily Canadian families' lives. So again, balanced approach. A young child Skyping grandparents or long-distance friends or families, that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And in fact, this is actually a really good example of how technology can play a complementary role, can be incorporated in a healthy way into our lives, because we're using it for a specific purpose, at a specific time, the parent is present, etc. So moving on to children older than 2, so the 2 to 5 year age, limiting routine or regular screen time to under 1 hour per day. And this continues to correspond to Canadian sedentary behavior guidelines, which is also recommending the less than 1 hour per day, as well as the American guidelines also are recommending less than 1 hour per day for under 5. Sedentary screen time as a routine in childcare centers is not recommended for kids under 5 years. So this should never happen, right? There are so many other healthy alternatives that can be and should be built into childcare routines. Outdoor play, turn-taking, sharing, imaginative play, that should all be incorporated into this programming. Screen time really should be a special treat, right? The PJ and movie day, that's a special treat. And that doesn't, I just want to highlight it's routine and regular that we're highlighting. Or using an app, using technology to get out and explore nature. It's, again, a great example of how technology can be used. Another recommendation is to have screen-free times. So for book sharing, meal times, really incorporate these into the daily routine. And avoiding screens at least an hour before bed, if not longer, particularly for the potential of the melatonin suppressing effect of the lights. The next M for screen time counseling is to mitigate, or in other words, reduce the risk of screen time by co-viewing. So being present, being engaged when screens are used at all times with young children. So really this is a key point. A young child shouldn't be just left in a room with a screen or a tablet to their own devices. We know how quickly it is that they can explore the internet just a click or a swipe away. Being aware of content, this is another big recommendation. Prioritizing educational programming and teaching children themselves to start to recognize problematic content. You can only teach children problematic content if you're right there co-viewing with them. The Canadian Home Video rating system is a good place for parents to start if they're asking about appropriate content. As well, the CPS has lots of resources linked to their website and the Caring for Kids website, which is for parents and caregivers, on appropriate content. And this was one of the themes that came out of the survey. Parents really want to know, okay, well, how do I put limits on this stuff? Well, the reality is limit setting for screens started early should be no different than setting limits on other areas of the child's daily routine. For example, bicycles. If you're going to go out and ride your bicycle, what do you need to use? The helmet, right? It just goes hand in hand. The children learn that's part of the routine. They don't even fight or ask questions after it's become part of their routine. It's the same with the screens. No, you can't eat Cocoa Puffs every day for breakfast. So I think that parents are feeling really anxious and how do I take that screen away from them? Well, we're trying to encourage, okay, let's start these limits early. It's all part of developing healthy parenting strategies. And again, a lot of these resources can be found linked on the CPS website. The third M of screen time counseling is mindfully use. So really, we're asking parents to start to consider doing a self-assessment. What are your current screen habits? And the American Academy of Pediatrics has this excellent family media plan linked on their website, and it's also linked through the CPS as well, just to get families started, thinking about, let's get a plan. Let's start to develop, when are we going to use screens? How are we going to use screens? What are we going to use our screens for? And that way the children can start to get involved in some of these decisions, and they can be part of those. And this is the clinical tool that the task force developed, the CPS task force developed, and it is also on the website, and we can give you copies as well. It's a tool that's not meant as a parent handout, but this is something for a clinician to use in order to counsel families of young children on healthy screen use. And so on the left side, you'll see a summary of the position statement and the 4M model that we're going through today. And on the right side are 10 questions to consider asking families when you are counseling around screen use. Things like, what kind of screens are in your home currently and how are they used? Does anyone use screens at meal times? Does anyone use screens before bed? It just opens up the conversation. Again, in order to mindfully use, starting to help children recognize problematic content, paying attention to messages of gender, body image, violence, diversity, social issues when choosing content. And too much screen time leads to lost opportunities for other types of learning. This is a key message. There's really no evidence to suggest that introducing screen time early is going to promote development, or by not introducing screen time that you're putting their development at risk in any way. So, children don't have to watch screen-based media to be affected by it, right? And this was what Will was talking about a little bit earlier, about modeling healthy use of screen time. A big message. Modeling. Take a look at this picture. This could be any of us clinicians in the room. Look at the tablet in her hand and where her eye gaze is. She could be counseling a young parent on healthy screen use. She could be looking at a medical app. But she's actually using it for a purpose. She's using it as a tool. It's not meant to be a toy, to be sort of just stuffed in the corner and go off and play. This is a tool. This is a really healthy use of screens. And when kids see us using our screens in this way, the hope is that they will model that behavior as well. Kids need us to help them choose healthier alternatives, right? Reading, outdoor play, creative hands-on activities, so much to be offered. This is a big recommendation. Turn off your device when not in use, particularly background TV. We do have evidence that background TV negatively impacts on child and family dynamics. It distracts from play. Parents ask fewer questions. They talk less. There's less words. In fact, another study out of the States looked at groups of parents and toddlers, and they looked at what the interaction was like. It was an observational study. What was the interaction when they gave them traditional toys like blocks, books, or an electronic toy? And they found a significant decrease in the verbal interactions of a parent with the electronic toys. So they asked fewer questions, they talked less, there was less interaction because it was as though the parent felt that the toy was doing all that for them. So really, to summarize the 4 M's of screen time counseling, in general, minimizing time on screens, particularly no screen time is recommended for children under the age of 2. We know it doesn't enhance or benefit their development in any way, and we do know it does benefit early childhood development. Mitigate, so reduce the risk by being present, co-viewing, monitoring, mindfully use, right? Consider advising parents and caregivers to come up with a family media plan. Take a look at our clinical tool and the stuff we have out on the CPS website, and model our own use of screen time. And I have a bunch of references available as well, but I will just now pause and see if there's any questions. Yeah, so it's 1 hour before bed, really, because of the melatonin, the way the hormone works. And you know, it's different for everybody. It's different for every child. I have lots of families that say, oh, they have a TV in their room and it helps soothe them, right? So it's very, these are very broad recommendations. And we do know that the light does suppress melatonin, and so that people can be very sensitive to that. And again, the infants using touch screens, we actually do have evidence that they have delayed sleep onset and more frequent night wakenings. So it is starting to emerge. Yeah, it is the light. So some screens you can have the blocks on the screen to filter out the blue light that does tend to be more suppressing on the melatonin. But again, everybody's different, right? Some people can drink a cup of coffee, for instance, at 10 o'clock at night and go to bed, whereas we always recommend no caffeine, you know, with kids that have sleep disorders, right? So I think it's a very individualized approach when you're counseling, but the general recommendation is that the screen, the lights from the screen, as well as natural light, can impact on that melatonin. Yeah, and that's a really good question, and I think that highlights that the majority of our research is still based on TV data. The newer studies are based on shorter term effects and the newer devices that are available to us. So I think we'll see that over the next 10 years, we'll get some better data on what are the different devices' impacts specifically. But for now, screen time is all lumped into one. That is a very good question. And because of the youngest age group that we were looking at, 0 to 5, there wasn't a lot of, first of all, the research is scant in the younger population. So then separating out sex differences, there wasn't any. But I imagine when we start the next position statement on school age, as well as adolescence, those are going to be key points to make. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so the launch of the position statement took place in June in Vancouver at the Canadian Paediatric Society annual meeting. And so there was a bit of a media blitz at that point. All of this stuff is on the website. And it's really, the focus initially was to get out to pediatricians, family physicians, and healthcare providers. The next step, of course, is disseminating it further to other clinicians because there's so many people that are impacted by this. Right. So actually, in general, the feedback was quite positive. And I think because the guidelines really align with other groups, like the sedentary behavior and other Canadian groups, it was positive feedback. The next step for the CPS is we're going to be doing a follow-up survey of membership. So similar to the survey that we took prior to developing this statement, we're going to send that survey out again to see how it's actually being used in practice. But so far, that's probably another 6 months from now.